Hello everyone, my name's Emily Billing and I'm Nintex's Community Manager. Welcome to the Nintex Platform Fundamentals video series. In this video, I'd like to show you an overview of state machines available in Nintex Workflow. This is really useful when you have a more complex business process that requires multiple process changes during a single workflow. Today I'll be showing you an overview of state machines and how they're useful, the differences between sequential and state machine workflows. We'll also look at an example of creating a press release business process, and then what that looks like in a state machine workflow. Finally, we'll go through a live demo where we'll create a state machine workflow. Let's start with taking a look at an overview of state machines. A state machine workflow can route a business process between multiple states, allowing you to jump back and forth between different but repetitive steps in a process. To create a state machine workflow, you use the state machine action found in the Workflow Actions toolbox within the Workflow Designer. Once the action has been added, you will see two states by default, State 1 and State 2, and their associated branches. You can add workflow actions to each state branch, defining the process that will run for each state. The state machine action supports the configuration of a number of states, and states can be added, deleted, and renamed. The state machine also uses the change state action to set which state to run next, which is what allows for jumping from one branch to another. A change state action can be configured to change to any other state available in the state machine. You can run your different state branches in any order and even rerun them if necessary. The state machine part of the workflow will continue until the state has been set to end state machine in one of the change state actions. To further understand state machines, let's take a look at the differences between state machine and sequential workflows. When designing a workflow, it's best to first think about the business process you are creating and the flow of the information. Once you've mapped out your business process, you can begin looking at which workflow model would work best, sequential or state machine. Sequential workflows have a clear and defined start and finish, with no changing of process branches needed. In the diagram, we can see a business process for approving a press release. It starts with an article being submitted for review, with only two options before reaching the end, approved or declined. The article can only take one of these paths, with no additional branches that it can move to should something change in the process. Once a decision has been made, for example if it's declined, the article will follow that path and then the workflow will end. For more complex business processes, it may not be as simple as designing a sequential workflow. You may need to change to a different process branch in the middle of the workflow based on a particular condition. In this case, you would want to create a state machine workflow, which allows you to move between different states in the workflow. There is no defined path that it has to take. It is always based on what condition is met. Let's take a further look at this press release process to see how a state machine works and how it can be useful. The process starts with an article being submitted for publishing, but instead of just being approved or rejected, it needs to go through a series of approval stages. You start by defining the initial process branch or state where you want the workflow to start. In our case, with manager approval. You can choose any state to start in, and it does not matter what order these states appear, since you can always define which state the workflow needs to be in. Once the workflow begins, the manager is given a task to approve the submitted article, and depending on the outcome, will determine whether it goes to author for revision or legal for review. If approved, it's sent to legal, where they can review, and again, depending on the outcome, will determine which process branch to change to next. If legal decides that it needs additional revisions, it's sent back to the author to make the requested updates, and the process begins again. The revisions are made by the author, then sent to the manager for approval, then if approved, sent to legal again for review. At this point, legal will review, and if approved, will be sent to publishing. Each of these stages are a decision point in a business process, and each decision can have multiple outcomes. It's not a simple straight line. It needs to move from person to person and may need to go back and repeat a process, maybe even multiple times, or jump to a different point later in the process. So now that we've seen what the process looks like, let's take a look at the state machine workflow. This is what our press release process looks like, built with a state machine workflow. So if we think back to the press release process, we know the business process needs to go through a series of approval stages, beginning with the manager. The manager is given a task to approve the process, and depending on the outcome, will determine whether it goes to legal for review or to the author for revisions. Under the change state action, the workflow will change to the appropriate process branch for that outcome. So if it's approved, it's ready for legal, and the workflow state will change to the legal review branch. Once sent to legal, they will receive a task where they have 3 decisions: approve the draft for publishing, request clarification from the manager, or request revisions from the author. If they think it needs additional revisions, the state will change to the author for revisions. They'll receive a task to make the requested updates, and once complete, the state will change back to the manager where the process will begin again. The manager will receive a task for approval, then if approved, sent to legal again for review. So that's how the press release process looks in a state machine workflow. Let's go ahead and create our own state machine workflow with a similar process. For this demo, we'll be creating a workflow for an advertisement creation process. The graphics team needs to approve the artwork, the marketing department needs to approve the artwork and content, and the CEO needs to approve the entire advertisement. If the marketing department rejects the artwork returns to the graphics department. If the CEO rejects the advertisement, then it returns to the marketing department. So now let's jump over to my environment and we'll create the workflow. Here we are in my demo environment, and I've already gone ahead and opened our SharePoint list where we want to create the workflow. To create the workflow, you need to go to the List tab, then select Workflow Settings and create a workflow in Nintex Workflow. I'm not planning on using a template, so let's just create a blank workflow. Now we can begin building the workflow. And the first action that we're going to drag onto our canvas is the state machine, and you'll find that under the Logic and Flow section. Let's double click on the state machine action, and this is going to open the configuration dialog. We have 3 states, and the first state is graphics. State number 2 is marketing department, and we want to add a new state, and this is our CEO approval. Now before we go out of this action, we also need to select the initial state, and we want the state to begin with our graphics team. Now we can go ahead and save the action. The next step is to add in a request approval workflow action. And we're going to put 1 in each of the stages. Now for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to use a demo user for each one, but you would have the request approval going to the appropriate person. So if it's the graphics team, it's going to go to someone within the graphics team. So we'll use our lookup icon for the approvers section. And this is my demo person. All right. And we'll just do a repeat for these 3. Now you could make this quite fancy and change up any of the task notification emails, but I'm going to keep it quite simple. Okay, so now let's pop over to our graphics team stage. If the advertisement is rejected from the graphics team, an email needs to be sent to the initiator to end the workflow. So to do that, we're going to use a send notification email, and this is on the declined branch. So let's go ahead and configure this action. So we're going to send it to our initiator using our lookup function. And our subject is your graphics has been declined. Because the graphics were declined, this is the end of the workflow. So in order to end the workflow on this, we need to add a change state action, and you're going to find this in Logic and Flow. We'll drag this onto the designer canvas below our email notification. And let's just go ahead and select End State Machine. To end a state machine, you will need to use the change state action. If you use any other type of action, such as the end workflow action, that can cause any number of fun or random errors. So sticking with the change state action is the way to go with state machine workflows. If the graphics are approved, however, then we want the state machine to continue. And we can do that with the change state action again. All we need to do is select the next state. And so this time it's going to be sent off to our marketing department. Now we're going to keep using the change state action. If the marketing department declines the graphics from the team, then we're going to send it back to them. If, however, they approve it, we want to send it to the CEO. Now, if our CEO declines the advertisement, then they need to be able to send it back to the marketing department. However, if they approve it, we need to set it so that the state machine ends. Again, we use the change state action, and this time selecting End State Machine. Before we actually publish the workflow, I also want to notify the initiator that the advertisement has been approved by the CEO. So again, to do that, we just need our send notification action, send it to our initiator via the lookup function, and this time your advertisement has been approved. Okay, so now that we've finished designing our workflow, we can publish it so it's available for use. And you do that by clicking the Publish button in the ribbon and giving your workflow a new name. So let's call this Press Release. Okay, so our workflow has now been published and it's available for use. You've now created a state machine workflow. So let's go back to our presentation. To find additional information on what we covered today, you can reference Nintex's community site, Nintex Connect, or the Nintex Online Help. These are both great resources with detailed product information and helpful explanations, including step-by-step tutorials. You can ask questions and collaborate with others easily on the community site, and also browse articles, blog posts, and find the latest product guides and release information. Nintex Help provides in-depth explanations on how to configure and use the product features, including tips and tricks for common scenarios. If you need help while creating your workflow, you can click the Help button to access the online help directly from the workflow designer. If you'd like more information on configuring a state machine workflow, we have a tutorial available on Nintex Connect called Using State Machine Workflows. This will take you through the entire process step by step for creating a state machine workflow. You can find it by searching for State Machine. Nintex Connect and Nintex Help are both really useful resources with lots of information available. If you haven't already, be sure to check them out for more information. You've just seen an overview of state machine workflows for Nintex Workflow. This can be helpful when you have a business process that needs to jump back and forth between different steps in a process. Try creating a state machine workflow for yourself to see how it works for you. Be sure to check out the rest of our videos on how to manage and get the most out of Nintex products. Thanks for watching.